So building upon our previous thing, where we try to see the logical, the metaphysical, the ontological as not being exclusive, we at the end arrived at something uh, like Faud or Wijdan, which in Iqbalian theme is the seat of thing where all experiences you can ground them. Whether you can call mystical experiences or whether you can call mystical way of looking at things, or you can ground them in a larger prophetic way, prophetic revelation, or where in the terms which are being used as that of Faud or Qalb or heart. So before coming to what in the coming few concluding pages of this chapter, what Iqbal wants to say is basically he's trying to see the content of the mystical, what I should say, consciousness, which is which you can see, which is a sort of appreciative self, having a cognitive element, which will and to give it a sort of justification, and a sort of epistemic justification. But that epistemic justification is grounded, is seen, it's been contrasted, or it's being flared upon, or it's being seen vis-a-vis various developments in the psychiatric science, in the sciences, particularly psychiatry, psychology, the 20th century debates in psychiatry, the Freudian way of looking at things in general, the way William James tried to give the mystical consciousness. He tried to give the content of mystical consciousness an element, but not that respectability, which an overarching respectability, which from which religions or all religions they spring from. So, in giving content to the mystical experiences or mystical expressions and connecting with them, with that, they are grounded in some a sort of knowledge content can be derived, which is cognitive, but which is not the source of that is suprarational in that sense, although it may be experiential. Now the point is, where is the problem? The problem is in the content in the 20th century way of looking at psychiatries or psychological experiences, post Freudian, or even all the schools of psychiatry, whether Jungian school, maybe it somehow differed with the Freudian school in some in giving the content of the ultimate source of energy in Jung. But apart from Freud, Elder, and the whole school, you can see it. So it was somehow ambivalent, or it was what I should say, it negated the nature of psychical content of experiences which were mystical, or which are derived from religion. So here Iqbal is trying to see in very there are very somewhat insightful passages where he is also trying to just prove or show from his understanding or from his way he has seen things, to give the mystical experiences or the psychic experiences which are revelational and which have some content, and then that content is you cannot, from the way we define knowledge, you cannot deny it. So in that process, for example, if I quote some of his verses, for example, he says, "The revealed and the mystical literature of mankind bears ample testimony to the fact that religious experience has been too enduring and dominant in the history of mankind to be rejected as mere illusion. There seems to be no reason then to accept that normal level of human experiences as fact and reject its other levels as mystical and emotional. So to do away, so you cannot deny the if you want to have a statistical inference, the very magnitude of thing doesn't should not in the first place deny our belief that mystical experience can have a content, a knowledge content, which is not a mere fancy or it's not mere what I should say according to Freud, just satisfying those primeval needs or a sort of which cannot be seen in the realistic world. That mind plays its own games with its conscious and subconscious. What cannot be achieved in the real, it transports itself into sort of unreal, or it sublimates into that thing, and that's the level of how we can explain it in that sense. So, for example, in that context, he is also not only critiquing Freud, but he is also saying critiquing William James. So, if he says, for example, but the difference of mystic state from ordinary rational consciousness does not mean discontinuous from the normal consciousness, as William James states. So, you cannot. So, if you want to, so the cut. So, if you don't want to justify that religious instinct or religious feeling merely to the fact that it is cut from the normal consciousness in that sense. So you can say, for example, further, the mystic states brings us into contact with the total passage of the reality, in which all diverse stimuli merge into one another and form a single unanalyzable unity in which the ordinary distinction of subject and object does not exist. So here you can say that a feeling of wholeness, the feeling of unity, being part of larger cosmos or larger reality, and which is basically, you can take it as a creator, or you can take it in different religions or different the content varies from how we can give expression to that thing from religion, whether it's monotheistic, monistic, pantheistic. So there can be various analyzable or unanalyzable content of the consciousness which is being arrived at as a part of experiences in that sense. So here, for example, there are a couple of questions which he is trying to say. For example, Iqbal wants to say that self-transcending, all-encompassing, or momentarily suppressing the private personality. So if you want to see that consciousness, so there are a couple of questions. For example, so how can we see, how we can give meaning to those mystical experiences? So he uses famously, if I quote Quran, that "Ama yantikul hawa." So if you want to directly go to the what I should say, give justification to the mystical consciousness from the prophetic way of understanding, not understanding how revelation can be seen in a fundamental way, where we have Quranic verses, "Wama yantikul hawa," say prophet, you don't say out of your own wishes or desires, but this is a message which is revealed to you. The Quran neither speaks he from mere impulse, no other than revelation revealed. So one strong power in the proverb taught it him, endowed with wisdom, with even balance stood he in the highest part of the horizon. So the point is, so if it is the content or the derivation of mystical experiences can be seen to be the source of revelation, if it's extra rational or if it's source of that creation, it's a language which is being spoken from eternally. So the question is, why is it then incommunicable in that sense? And why is not discursive intellect able to catch it in that sense? So the point is that the profundity of that experience is too much that it cannot be thought, is not you cannot see in that sense. So before I'm going to continue what Iqbal is trying to say, so I just whatever I have said up to this time, so I'm going to ground it in various debates, or the how mysticism, or in Islamic discourse we call Sufism. So in different religions, they have different ways of just how can give meaning to those states, whether it's prophetic consciousness or at a lower level mystic consciousness. So there are whole debates or discourses or schools which have been right across from the point. For example, from Islam started, if I'll just see it through Islam or different mystical traditions, there is a particular history to it, there is a particular tradition to it. And in that sense, how can, apart from, if we want to see religion in some as an all encompassing thing, where a metaphysics, where philosophy, whether faith, jurisprudence, whether tafsir, kalam. So there can be different ways of looking at reality. So the mystical consciousness normally is basically grounded in some sort of love, or a inspiring an inspiring inspiration, which is committal towards something which cannot be somehow explained by in some rational terms, in that sense. So rationality follows that sensibility in that sense. For example, so if I quote Ahmad Javed, one of the one of the expert, or one of the Sufis. So if you just follow through his, so I have just taken some of the extracts from his lectures on Sufism. So that will give us inkling of how the mystical consciousness or the Sufi way of looking at things can be seen in the discourse of Islam. And later we are going to extend it to other religions or other schools of mystical doctrines, starting from here. So he starts, for example, he says, if I quote in Urdu, then I can translate it. For example, tasawwuf ke zahiri aur gehri asbab kya hain? So tasawwuf is a Sufi, or you can say it's a sort of a mystical doctrine in that sense. हम असरात करते हैं कि तौहीद में एक हो सकते हैं, और हम इस अकीदे की तफसील में है एक हो सकते हैं. Means religion in the basic narrative for its believers is one in meaning, but can be seen in the applications of human psyche. That unity breaks down, which can have convergent or divergent meanings, and which can be inferred from some immediate meanings and some binding meanings. For example, trust in some convergent and divergent meanings can lead to you, for example, this fiqh, there's kalam, there's tasawwuf. So whether they are right or wrong in that sense, they can only be seen vis-a-vis that universal meaning, the source of that meaning, that's revealational. So philosophical Sufism, or which is also called as doctrinal Sufism, where we can say that culture determines these specifications around which mind develops. So if we want to see, apart from the way the mystical consciousness has evolved, whether in Islam or whether in a different monastic religion, whether it in Kabbalah, whether it in Christian mysticism, or whether in Hindu mystics, yogis, or whether Buddhists. So apart from that, so in Islam, for example, there is a strange, there is an admixture of love and fear of Allah, which go into the making of it. For example, according to Ahmad Javid, he says, "जो अल्लाह से डरता नहीं, वो अल्लाह पर मरता नहीं है." One who doesn't fear God does not love God. Or I have experienced God without seeing God. So this is the content of that mystical experiences. So various people and civilizations from various minds were additional to the culture of Islam. For example, yeah, piri muridi. So for example, in that sense, what I should say, you can say. सो तसव्वुफ रिवायत में जिन हक़ाइक़ को बयान करती है, व्हाट्स नोन एज डॉक्ट्रिन तसव्वुफ, इट कंसिस्ट तसव्वुफ के मकासिद मींस एम्स ऑफ तसव्वुफ, मारिफत हक, मोहब्बत हक, खशियत हक, in that these are various terms which are used to just explain, for example, पहले इंसान क्या है, what is man, दूसरे खुदा क्या है, what is God. So जब खुदा को गायब समझा गया तो इसको जानने की कोशिश की गई. So when God was unseen, or he was beyond the apparent or the real, which is apparent. So there was that urge to demystify or to go that thing. खुदा को गायब समझा गया तो इसको जानने की कोशिश की. इस कोशिश को जानने का दावा खुदा को कायनात और इंसान से वजूदी ताल्लुक है किया. हकीकतुल हकीकत के हकाइक, अल्लाह अहदुल अहद, means that ultimate unity which is we are going to go for, that which is not apparent, which is beneath and beyond, which is truth of those truths, oneness or oneness of the one, which we call unity of being. And there can be three sources we have to just discover or know whether it's. So in the mystical way, Islamic mystical way, there is something called ilham. Ilham is something, a sort of henothetic experience, a sort of hoods which comes. And this kashf, in that sense, you can also have that sense. So you can say in the history of, for example, there are very few touching lines which I am saying how tasawwuf as a discipline, or which Iqbal tries to say in terms of mystic experiences, which later got institutionalized in the Muslim thought process in a certain way. So how did it come in that sense? So if you want to say it in the purest form, how mystics or Sufis want to see it in that say, so they say पहले अल्लाह खामोशी का content था. Earlier God was seen in the silence. The content of God was silence. फिर गुफ्तगू का context था. Then it became the matter of conversation. You started to talk. फिर आवाज में गुम हो गया. Then people started to just debate and discuss. फिक्र का नाम गुफ्तगू है. And when you talk of law and jurisprudence, what the God wants to desire from you, you talked in terms of that edicts, and you want to codify things, what gods want to. Then you come. So you start. So in the discovery and in the search for that unseen thing which is part of some unity, in that sense, in the love of that. So once people wanted to give expression to it, it led to sort of decadence, or it led to sort of tanazul, what you call in Urdu, in that sense. So मारिफत को तफसील मौजू गुफ्तगू का काम है. सो बड़ा जुल्म हुआ. मारिफत को जहनी बनाया गया. मारिफत को दिल से छीनकर जहन में ठोसने की कोशिश की गई. तसव्वुफ का जवाल और अदम जवाज तब जब तसव्वुफ को अक्ल बनाया गया. So this is what if I just quote Ahmad Jaid, he wants to say that The search for God or the love of God, when you try to just give words are too insufficient or too just, or rationality is not the proper medium by which you can go and just what I should say, derive the by which you can justify that thing in that sense. So the rational domain or the knowledge, the epistemic domain. So the profundity of that expression or experience or the love. So it's way ahead from that. It. So there are some very important questions. For example, now the questions are, for example, so we to determine what types and kinds of experience are called mystical, to specify and classify their main characteristics, to assign boundaries to the class, and to exclude the irrelevant types. Although there have been theists, there are pantheists, there are monotheists. So there have been even atheists who can be called mystics. So it's natural that mystics should detest the prying eye of a scholar, which I was saying, and the probing intellect of the philosopher. So now there are set of questions which you can just mount if you want to just say after what I have said. So, is there any set of characteristics which is common to all mystical experiences and distinguishes them from the other experiences and thus constitutes the universal core? So, if it's the common heritage of mankind, not particular religions. So, if there is such a universal course, is the argument for objectivity which has been based upon it a valid argument? So, if, for example, in the earlier chapters, Iqbal wants to give a scientific method, the way we have sort of value neutrality to scientific method, he wants to also say that a religious method is a sort of, there is some universality to it. So, if there is universality attached to it, but in the way we have scientific method, we have something called verification, something called replication, and experimentation. So in the mystical way, for example, there is irrationality, sort of mystical thing is attached to irrationality, incommunicability, there's intuitive insight, there's sense of beyond, there's impersonal tone, it's not personal, there's feeling of exaltation, and there's momentariness. So if you just go to different branches of psychiatry, so a mystic state. So for example, so the element of, if I quote R.D. Lange, a psychiatrist, he says mystics drown where other people swim, or you can say the mystic consciousness has a touch of seasonoperic. We just normally take sort of seasonoperic thing. So once if a person is powerless, he will go to those altered states of consciousness. The altered state of consciousness can also be sometimes drug induced or dopamine induced or whatever, or so you can give the content. The psychiatry will give the content of mystic experiences a different meaning. And as if a sort of leading to delusional states or mind games where you want to just have as escape mechanisms, not as an affirmative sense in which a mystical consciousness has to be seen in the Iqbalian perspective or in the general sense how religion wants to see things. So now the question is, so if that is the case, what I have said, so all mystical experiences are same in even their descriptions reflect an underlying similarity which transcends culture and religious diversity. So you can say it that way if you want to give mystical experiences. And so all mystical experiences are same, but the mystic reports about experiences are culturally bound. So which I earlier also said that what the application of the realization of truth also cannot be done away with the specific socio-cultural environments in which those truths are to be perceived. So thus, which they can different mystics use available symbols of cultural religious nucleon to describe those experiences. So all mystical experience can be divided into small class of texts which cut across cultural boundaries through language used by mystics to describe their experiences as culturally bound. Their experience is not. So maybe if we just if I want to quote, for example, there have been various scholars to mention. Maybe Zehner is there, Stace is there, Smart is there, and Smart. So they have provided various cross-cultural and phenomenological accounts of mystical experiences, which are phenomenological as well as physically suspects. So the point here I want to mention is that even though if you want to give input to the mystical experiences or some common grounding, they are universal, but in the specific socio-cultural contexts, their meanings can be exchanged or their meanings can differ. But beneath them, there is some universal core. But the point is that these scholars which I have quoted, they want to give that even these mystical experiences, their content should, why does it vary from religion to religion or experience to experience? For example, a mystical, for example, Hindu experience of Brahman and Christian experience of God are not the same. This is what I will say. So in the Hindu ideas, we have monistic, pantheistic, and theistic strengths, while Christianity has both absorptive and non-absorptive forms of mysticism. So the question is, so the study of mystical experiences could be highly informative, providing insights that will enrich metaphysical theorizing. So metaphysical theorizing earlier. So in the Islamic way of saying metaphysical theorizing is the idea of hoods and a henothetic thing and idea of being, the simultaneously existing. God is a reality who is responsible for both in that sense, who is eternally there and who is also simultaneously creating things in that sense. So the question is, if we want to give metaphysical meaning to different mystical experiences, if they diverge from religion to religion or experience to experience, so mistrust in metaphysics intensified by general trust for religious certainty is can be seen being it's being exacerbated or it's being, what I should say, the way we have tried to see in the previous sort of lectures, Kant's way of denial of metaphysics in that sense. So that Kant's rejection of speculative metaphysics actually attributed to rational philosophers like Discourses, Leibniz, who sought to deduce truth about reality from basic principles of rationality. Without regards to the limits of reason or without regards to the metaphysics not being without metaphysics not being possible in the rational sense, in the Kantian sense, or the without the limitations of reason. Reason has some fundamental inadequacy of reaching to the absolute realities. So if you have faith in reason and rationality, so the mystical way of or the going for that absolute or the ultimate from the suprarational, so it is a sort of problem. Now here in the 20th century, there have been perennialists who want to somehow have sort of what I should say, sort of consensus of core, which they want to share a sort of common core, where consensus is not derived from shared mystical experiences or discernment, whatever that may be. So the consensus is there, but it's not derived from the shared mystical experiences. For example, Sirvalari Radhakrishna, one of the philosophers, religious philosophers, for example, sees Upanishads, Buddha, Plotinus, Jesus, and medieval mystics of Islam. They are coming to something common, some common core. So metaphysics can be metaphysicians, the metaphysical principles. They can be right from whether you are a monotheist, whether you are a dualist, whether you are a Platonist, whether you are non. For example, if you are a non-dual Kashmiri Shaivists, he will make claims of Gnostic inspirations, and it can be interpreted as idealistic monism, making consciousness primary and matter derivative. In the context of the way, if you want to see monists, if you want to see pantheists, if you want to, so in the monotheists, the idea of God, creator, and the creator, they are separate in that sense. So, and further, if you want to see, there are medieval mystical medievalists. And there are, for example, we see different traditions have different experiences because reality is experienced by them, is mediated and clothed in tradition, in specific garb, or radical contextualism. Mystics in different traditions have different experience because their experiences are fully conditioned by traditions to specific teachings they revive and practices they undertake. Or postmodern relativism, where you can have culture and linguistic situatedness of mystics, and expects a diversity of conditioned experiences across traditions. And thus, commonality is not a result of contact to deeper reality, but shared biology and psychology. And you can also have neuroscientific reductionism, where mystics of different traditions have similar experiences because experiences are product of neurobiological and psychological mechanisms. But mystics may describe and interpret the experiences differently according to their religious backgrounds. So the thing is that you have seen what I have said. That the content of mystical experiences and whether it's being seen, if it has a common universal core, and if that common universal core, even if can be interpreted from different mystical traditions or different religions, the content of it can be same. Or if you want to fundamentally degree that even the content of mystical experiences may vary from religion to religion, and the metaphysical significance of, for example, Atman and Brahman, the metaphysics may be different from Allah or Yehovah, or so these are the two things we can interpret. So if you want to have a naturalistic explanation of religion, which is dominated by 20th century psychiatry or psychology, or so you want to explain the mystical experiences in biological, sociological, cultural, neurological, and these terms. But the aim and the way Iqbal wants to defend things, again, whatever I have, the sort of history I have given in that sense. So here I'll maybe quote, for example, some of the very interesting passages towards that effect of Iqbal. So, for example, Iqbal says, the truth is that the organic causation of our mental states has nothing to do with the criteria by which we judge them to be superior or inferior in the point of value. Among the vision and so this is the point. So, or for the purposes of knowledge, then the region of mystic experience is as real as any other region of human experience, and cannot be ignored merely because it cannot be traced back to sense perception. So, if we want to deny mystical experience, the genuine mystical experiences, you cannot deny it, that you cannot trace it to psychoneurotic. So if I quote Freud, he was a theoretical reductionistic and methodological non-reductionistic. So the sciences of his time were not able to just reduce neurology to chemistry and biophysics, which we in 20th, in our times we try to see things in that way. So you have arrived at a conclusion that all psychical experiences, their derivative is neuropsychological or neurobiological in that sense. So Iqbal is saying that a mystic experience as real as any other human experience and cannot be ignored merely because it cannot be traced back to sense perceptions in that sense. Yes, yes. So, for example, so for example, Iqbal says, if I quote him another sentence, he says, so, incommunicability of mystical experience is due to the fact that it is essentially a matter of inarticulate feeling, untouched by the discursive intellect. So, this is a good. So, it must, however, be noted that mystical feelings, like all feelings, has a cognitive element also, and it is, I believe, because of this cognitive element that it lends itself in the form of idea. In fact, it is the nature of feeling to seek expression in thought. It would seem that the two, feeling and idea, are non-temporal and temporal aspects of the same unit of inner experience. Feeling is instability of an entire conscious self, and that which is to restore the stability of this self lies not within its own border, but beyond it. So Iqbal is trying to say that if the content of idea and mystical they have their roots in feeling, and feeling is gives rise to both idea and what I should say. Um, okay, I'll just maybe use. So the point to mention is that Iqbal is trying to just give meaning to the mystical way of looking at the mystic experience has a cognitive element and it stands on its own. Apart from the utilitarian functionalities of taking religion, the way William James wants to see things. So you can say the content of mystical experiences stands on its own, and the justification stands on its own. And the point is only to how to approach that data of experience in that sense, because somewhere Iqbal also says somewhere, for example, that in fact it must be said in justice to religion that it insists on the necessity of concrete experience in religious life long before science learned it to do so. So here it's a very interesting, insightful point. The conflict between the two is due not to the fact that one is the other is not based on concrete experience. Both see concrete experience as a point of departure. The conflict is due to the misapprehension that both interpret the same data of experience. We forget that religion aims at reaching the real significance of a special variety of human experience. So, if you want to, the aim of science is to explain the world, the materiality of the world, or the position of things. But the scope of mystical experience of going through religion or through, so it's that ultimate reality in that sense, even which is cause of this thing. So even though their mode of just how they arrived at something, the ultimates, their means may be same, but the end purpose is different. One is starting with the world and going back to the world as a part of explanation. The other is you start with the world, but you go beyond the world to explain things or to realize things. Explain is a more rational way of looking at things. So that's it. So the content of religious experience or mystical experience, in that sense. So maybe Paul is trying to, for example, there is also something called, for example, the Socratian method, for example, of midwifery in that sense. So which I am going to relate it with the way, for example, Iqbal in the start says, for example, when he quotes, Iqbal also quotes him, for example, in trying to see here, there's a tradition in Bukhari that a young Jewish child, he had some problem, and his mother took him to Prophet of Islam, and he observed him. But before he could observe him, the child did hide behind the bushes. So the Prophet of Islam said that had he been there, had I not hid him at the appropriate time, I could have said something more about the child. So the keenness of prophetic way of looking at things, where to see, observe something untinctured. So in the Freudian way of looking at things, for example, in the Freudian psychoanalytic method, the aim of psychoanalysts was for a patient to come out of those repressed feelings or repressed data. So the aim of psychoanalyst is to act as sort of midwifery. So if I quote, so Socrates' method of midwifery, according to Kierkegaard, is the teacher in bringing to consciousness that which the student already knows potentially. For Socrates, as far as the religions of experience, truth is discerned by means of conscious self-discovery. So this, which Iqbal is also trying to elude, the aim of religion or the aim of a prophetic way of from his seerah, you can just decipher it that way. But here the point is that the way, for example, the distinction between monistic, theistic experiences that later maintains the distinction between man and God in that sense. But if I quote A.G. Arbery, who says, whatever religions proposed by individual mystic or a constant, unvarying phenomena of universal yearning of human spirit for communion with God. One truth is here Jesus, there is Krishna, or there is Buddha, or there is love, or there is Muhammad. So this is this you can read it in the background of trying to see what I should say, the common core of all mystical or religious experiences. For example, while in case of panhenic experiences may be described as experience of oneness of all things, or Majid Fakri says that philosophical mysticism associated with principal figures like Neoplatonism, for example, Al-Farabi, Ibn Sina, Baja refused Aristotle's notion of unmoved mover and infinite differences between God and man necessitated by Quranic teachings. So there can be what I should say differences or approaches, how to approach that ultimate in that sense. In the Quranic way of looking at things, there is a proper, you cannot be, the mystic doesn't, in the Iqbalian way also, the mystic doesn't dissolve in the God. Atman is not dissolved in the Brahman. So there is a, that differences between that God and man is there in that sense. The purpose of mystical experience or mystical consciousness is to come closer to that to the realization of that reality rather than getting dissolved in that reality. So in that sense you can say if a Freudian way of how, for example, acting as a midwifery, how to come out of that uh, labyrinth of subconsciousness, and basically realizing that thing. So in that sense, so this quest, what of this prophetic consciousness, and the modes and methods of psychiatry. For example, where Iqbal also just somehow also even here appreciates Freud. He says it is the elimination of satanic from the divine that the followers of Freud have done inestimable service to religion. Although I cannot help saying that the main theory of neuropsychology does not appear to me to be supported by any adequate evidence. So some aspects of Freudian psychiatry or psychoanalysis, where the Freud's quest for unconscious, which was basically to basically address the questions: why is it difficult to assess unconsciousness and we are able to relieve symptoms, and how can a doctor get access to the content of unconsciousness, and what is the content of that unconsciousness, and what can one learn about that residual which is left inside that unconsciousness, and what are the laws and rules which govern the way or by which this unconscious functions. And in the light of whatever I have said in the Freudian theme, how best we can ameliorate or devise a strategy in treating patients or in teaching subjects in that sense, and subjects regarding repression and regarding interpretation of dreams, regarding misplaced sex or libido or functions of a conscious mind. So whole sort of maybe discipline of psychoanalysis has been done to address those questions. But if we want to give content and meaning to the these mystic consciousness, not in the way Freudian way, in the Iqbalian way. So you have to see. So even for example, if there is interpretation of dreams, there is this book by Ibn Sirin on dreams. So it will be also an interesting study. So how, in the way prophetic way, how dreams, how we can interpret dreams, how we can give them content of those dreams, how we can relate them with the empirical part of the thing, reality, and how we can have the interpretation of dreams a la Freud, how we can just conflict or contrast with them. So in that sense, and the way, for example, the way in the Freudian analysis, you have the ego, superego, you have childhood expressions. So in the sense, for example, in the hierarchy of needs of food, clothing, shelter, and then come or needs of reproduction or procreation, then come the needs of self-realization or Freudian self or Jungian individuation, or can then come the needs of enlightenment needs or sense of mission. So if you want to reverse that ladder in that sense, if religious consciousness has not to be seen in that way. So the Freudian way of just categorizing this early childhood, adolescence, then late adolescence, then old age. So the repressed thing which comes later as part of human psyche. So the role. So maybe I have mixing a lot of things. These are the ideas of psychiatry and psychology, trying to just how we can interpret the nature of experiences in general. But here in the Iqbalian theme, we want to give content to the mystical experiences, which can have cognitive content also, and which can have metaphysical meanings can also be attached to them. And even though maybe different religions or different mystical experiences can differ in their metaphysical or subjective contents, but the ultimate aim of these, for example, if I quote So religious experience I have tried to maintain is essentially a state of feeling with a cognitive aspect, the content of which cannot be communicated to others except in the form of judgment. Now, when a judgment which claims to be interpretation of a certain region of human experience, not accessible to me, is placed before me for my assent, I am entitled to ask, what is the guarantee of truth? Are we in a position of test which would reveal its validity? Maybe in the coming chapters, Iqbal is trying to devise a pragmatic tests in that sense, and intellectual test by which he wants to give validity to these mystical experiences or mystical consciousness in the later, if you want to extend it that way. So how we can have pragmatically tests, for example, the way a politician or the way a politician maybe test things on the ground. So in the same way, for example, a philosopher, for example, the pragmatic test judges it by fruits. The former is applied to the philosopher, the later by the prophet. The prophet as a person, his creative engagement with the society and providing social solutions to it from a from a revelation or from things which can be interpreted in that sense. We can see revelation and the knowledge derived from that revelation. So Iqbal is trying to give in the later chapters the intellectual test as well as the intellectual test and the pragmatic test in the coming chapters. So here, for example, Iqbal is also critiquing a Freudian way of looking at things. Nor is it possible to explain away the content of religious consciousness by attributing the whole thing to the working of sex impulse, or the two forms of consciousness, sexual and religious, are often hostile. So you can say Iqbal is somehow critiquing also 20th century developments in psychiatry. Maybe there are somewhere maybe in later stages, he is appreciating some parts, the way Jung differed from his master, Sigmund Freud, in giving different meaning to the idea of libido. The libido, Freudian libido is given in the Jungian framework a mystical, a sort of collective unconscious or animus, whatever he calls, and that can be rooted in religious experiences in that sense. So what was today's lecture? I try to just see before the seat of this Faud or this heart or Qalb can be realized in the way mystically things are being seen. But somehow I also forgot to say in Islam, these mystical institutions or tasawwuf, which we call that proper sense, in the earlier years, post-prophetic years, people were not called Sufis in that sense. It was a later invocation, and a lot of people are saying. So the idea of maybe it will lead to some different discussions. So the point to mention is basically that tasawwuf or mystical way of looking at things was closely related or relevant to the basic Quranic teachings or coming closer to the divine. And later people might have institutionalized these mystical things in developing various orders, Sufi orders, Chishtiya, these different orders. It might have led to absorbing mystical elements from different religions or different streams, and it might also have led to some corrupt practices or whatever you might want to say it. So the 20th century mind basically tries to interpret mystical experiences in the context of a sort of false release or dark release, or not giving mystical experiences the content which Iqbal wants to see they deserve it in that sense. So you have to see that point also. Although a lot of Sufis will say that you have to mysticism or Sufism itself is not an institutionalized structure. It's your inner journey towards that thing, and you can have there can be different ways of seeing the same things. But here I want to also mention, so the way you can also say the way, even though we say science is replicable, the replicability or the verifiability of the scientific method is there, but it's also sort of unless and until you go through a certain sort of procedure and experimentation and other things, it's also a sort of not that easy. The common argument against mystical method or religious method is it's not verifiable or it's not replicable. While in case of scientific experimentation, its verificability is there. It's so there's some sort of truth or sincerity is attached to it. But deep down, it's also not that simple. The whole scientific discourse and discourse of scientific philosophy or scientific way of looking at things, you have also passed through certain orders and certain hierarchies. You can. It's also not that simple. It's also very complex. So in that sense, so maybe whatever I try to say, maybe I think they might make sense to whatever I have said. These are random, sketchy, random, not random. I try to connect the field of mysticism, maybe, and how Iqbal wants to see mysticism, and in the background of 20th century discourses where mysticism had to be justified, and it was justified in some different ways in the Freudian discourse, the way William James, in the variety of religious experiences, has given content to those mystical discourses or the religious experiences. So Iqbal is not satisfied with anything. He wants to give content of mystical experiences. They stand on their own, and they have not only mystical element, they have cognitive element also. This is the point. And you can have an epistemology and knowledge. You can have a knowledge scheme to it. And in the later chapters, he is trying to just develop the philosophical test, and the other test is one is the philosophical test. The other is which I want to say is pragmatic test, which is going to later apply, which we are going to see in the coming lectures. Hope you might have made a sense to whatever I have said on today's lecture. Thanks for listening.